A few days ago, I packed up my car and made my way to an Airbnb that I rented a few miles outside of Andrews, North Carolina. I live and work just north of Atlanta, Georgia, and just felt like being in the city was draining what little bit of sanity I had left. Most of my team, including myself, had switched to working remotely from home due to quarantine regulations, and since I live alone, I was starting to feel the mental toll of staring at the same four walls of my cramped one-bedroom apartment day in and day out. A lot of people were struggling with the transitions to working from home, so our overall productivity decreased, and the workload seemed to pile up quicker than we could keep up with. Project after project kept getting dumped into my lap, and since we're all cooped up inside all the time, I didn't feel like I could escape the crushing weight of all this added stress. One day, I felt that I had reached my breaking point. I submitted a time-off notice to my supervisor, booked an Airbnb, and decided I would spend a couple of weeks unwinding near the Nantahala National Forest. I figured if I was going to have to be isolated, I could at least use a change of scenery. I had always enjoyed hiking, fishing, and camping as a child. In fact, moving to the big city for my job had always felt a little out of character for me. I was excited to reconnect with nature and enjoy everything that the park had to offer. I figured that due to all the lockdown restrictions, foot traffic on the hiking trails would probably be minimal, so I'd basically have most of the woods to myself. The weather was supposed to be nice and cool for most of my visit, without being unbearably cold. Perfect for wandering around in a forest, fishing, birdwatching, or whatever else I felt like doing. I left around sunrise and arrived at my rental shortly before noon. The cabin was moderately sized and rustic, but appeared to be well maintained for guests. I retrieved the key from the lockbox near the front door and made my way inside to get settled. The cabin was quite a bit larger than my one-bedroom apartment in the city, but somehow it felt much more welcoming. I walked into the bedroom and took in the breathtaking view from out of the panoramic window that covered the back wall. Miles of forest for as far as the eye could see, gently dissolving into shades of green and gray underneath the thick canopy of trees that allowed only scattered beams of sunlight to peek through. I mulled over the idea of plopping down on the bed then and there with one of the books that I had brought along with me, but decided against it, given that the day was still young and I was excited to go exploring. I had gotten rather lucky in finding this cabin rental. Not only was it secluded within the national forest, but one of the features mentioned on the website was that there was a private hiking trail that started right off to the side of the cabin itself. Several of the reviews that I read before booking said that the trail was scenic and captivating. A few miles to the east, the private trail would eventually dump out onto one of the public hiking routes, but according to the reviews, no one had ever had a stranger meander onto the private trail and end up near the cabin. I laced up my hiking boots and headed out onto the trail. Beautiful trees reaching high into the sky towered over me, gently tossing in the wind and rustling their leaves. I found myself staring up at them as I walked further and further into the forest, hardly able to take my eyes off them to watch where I was going. That is, until something tall and dark caught my attention deep within the trees, off the beaten path. I squinted to try and make out the large object, but couldn't discern what it was from where I was standing. Probably against my better judgment, I turned off the trail and started walking towards it. Curiosity had gotten the better of me, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep that night unless I quenched my thirst for adventure. As I approached it, I found myself puzzled as I realized what I was looking at. A darkly colored metal staircase, seemingly leading to nowhere. I walked around the base of the structure to see if I could figure out what had become of the rest of the building. To my surprise, there was no evidence of any building ever being connected to this bizarre set of stairs. I chuckled to myself at the absurdity of what I just found, reaching for my back pocket to retrieve my phone for some photographic evidence of this discovery. I quickly realized that in my excitement to get out onto the trails, I'd left my phone behind in the cabin. Probably wasn't the best idea to be out here without a phone anyway, I figured, so I turned back and found my way back onto the trail to head back to the cabin. I hadn't realized how much the hike took out of me, so I took a hot shower and decided to spend the rest of the evening relaxing. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed, but couldn't get the thought of that bizarre staircase out of the back of my mind. After making myself something to eat, I laced up my boots once again, double-checking to make sure that I had my cell phone, and set out to snap some pictures of my recent discovery, so that I could convince myself that I hadn't just imagined the whole thing. After walking for quite a while, scouring the dense trees as I progressed, I started to feel defeated, seemingly unable to locate where exactly I had found the staircase yesterday. Just as I began toying with the idea of heading back to the cabin to make myself something for lunch, a strange noise caught my attention from up ahead in the trees. I began to walk towards the direction of the sound, and soon enough, what had started off as a low humming noise had evolved into the rumbling tones of tribal horns being played in unison throughout the forest. The sound grew louder and louder as I continued towards the source, a creeping feeling of dread beginning to pool in the pit of my stomach. Before I even realized, as if I had been lulled into an unaware hypnosis by the droning of the horns, I snapped back into reality and stood in awe at the object standing before me. Somehow, I had made my way back to the foot of the mysterious staircase that I had discovered the day before. The horns were droning so loud now that I felt as though my thoughts themselves had been deafened. As if guided by a force beyond my own control, I felt myself placing my foot on the first step of the staircase, slowly beginning to ascend against my own free will. I reached the top, feeling a cold sweat break out across my entire body. My heart was pounding, but it felt as though I could not will my body to turn and leave. A deep, withering sense of dread coursed through my veins, churning my stomach and making me feel weak. As I dared to stare out into the forest from the top of the stairs, I noticed the edges of my vision beginning to darken and blur. Only moments before I lost consciousness, my eyes focused on a tall, dark, looming figure standing in the trees, seemingly watching me from afar. Seconds later, I felt my legs begin to fold beneath me, and the sound of the horns faded to a peaceful silence. When I awoke, I was lying in my bed back at the cabin. Panicked, I reached for my phone in my pocket, checking the time. Nearly midnight. My first thought was that I had actually come back from my hike early and had taken a nap, possibly having a nightmare in the process. My memory seemed hazy, and I was struggling to remember all of the details I had done earlier that morning. I dismissed my fear as being a part of my overactive imagination, and the residual stress from my job working its way out of my system. I breathed a sigh of relief, and began to calm down. That is, until I noticed I was still wearing my hiking boots. I have been exhausted many times in my life, but never to the point that I would have worn my muddy hiking shoes to bed. A sudden and lingering feeling of being watched rushed over me as I remembered that the large panoramic window to my right remained fully uncovered and open to the inky black forest surrounding the cabin. My hands began to shake as I summoned my willpower to turn and face the darkness, assuring myself that there would be nothing there. To my despair, what I saw outside of that window, against the backdrop of swirling darkness and moonlight, was a tall, thin black figure, their head resembling the eyeless skull of a deer. Several sets of bony antlers twisted and snarled around the top of its head, framing the cracked and decaying bone and limply hanging jaw that composed the rest of its face. Its body seemed to be made of twisted, gnarled branches and vines, dark and pulsing, as if they were made of rotting black worms. I stifled a scream, shuffling backwards and scrambling for my car keys on my nightstand beside my bed. I grabbed them, turning and bolting out of the cabin straight to my car, not even stopping to gather up my things. I turned the key on my ignition, and immediately, I was confronted with the terrifying creature, standing straight ahead of me, fully illuminated in my headlights. Without hesitation, I threw the car in reverse and spun around, speeding down the winding dirt road as fast as I could, and never daring to check my rearview mirror. I didn't stop until I was back to my apartment in Atlanta. After making it back inside, I checked my phone to see if I had managed to take any pictures, so that I could show or tell somebody about what had happened without them thinking I was crazy, but there was nothing there. I'm still not sure exactly what I saw back there, or what it was that I discovered, but all I know for sure is, if you ever find a staircase in the woods, turn and run away as fast as you can.